Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Kodandi and I just wanted to make a quick video about that scene in Oppenheimer where a line from the Hindu sacred text, the Bhagavad Gita, is read aloud during, and everyone online everywhere has something to say. And so I wanted to just kind of put my thoughts forward on this, because when you look at that scene and what is happening in a historical context, you get some really interesting things happening. Now, first of all, I want to say that the Bhagavad Gita is not intended to be used during sex acts. It is not a sexual text. So anyone doing that is really not using the text correctly and, probably not understanding the content or the context of the Bhagavad Gita. If you want to learn more about the Bhagavad Gita, what it means, and if you want a version of it that is, very modern, very contemporary, there is a link in the comments and in the Show More section where you can download two different versions, the Bhagavad Gita Decoded and the Bhagavad Gita Demystified, commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita by my guru, Bhagawan Sri Nityananda Paramashivam. And that will help to give you a very, modern and contemporary and relevant context and interpretation of the text. And so when we look at the history of the Bhagavad Gita in the West, we have some interesting things happening, because the Bhagavad Gita came to the West during the time of British colonization in the 19th century. And it was very popular amongst people that were spiritual, such as Theosophy, people who were interested in sort of, new avant-garde art and culture movements, people interested in philosophy, and they were using translations, some of the original translations into English or French or, whatever language. Translations that happened during the time of colonization. And so the way that people approached the text and translated the text is very heavily influenced by colonization and was generally not read in a religious context. It was not read like a religious Hindu might read it. You can look through the works of Walt Whitman, Thoreau, Aldous Huxley. So many of these people, writers and artists, were reading the Bhagavad Gita, and it was influencing their own personal philosophies and writing and art and things like that. And so because so many of these people were taking the Bhagavad Gita out of its religious and cultural context and putting it into a Western philosophical context, we see some really interesting ideas and really interesting uses, and honestly, some inappropriate uses and inappropriate approaches to the Bhagavad Gita, including what we see in Oppenheimer, where the Bhagavad Gita is read during sex. This is a fact of history. This is something that actually happened. Actually, I don't know if that scene actually happened, but the inappropriate use of Hindu religious text by Western philosophers and creatives and spiritual people, that's a known fact. It's not just Hindu texts and scriptures, but also Buddhist texts and scriptures that got this really out of context, inappropriate treatment. A prime example of that is Jack Kerouac's book Dharma Bums, that is so terrible. How these characters are described as using Buddhist text and concepts and translating Buddhist texts in a massively inappropriate way. It's the year 2023, and hopefully we have all come to a better place with our understanding of how to relate appropriately with different cultures and religions, and also have an understanding of the post-colonial world and the damage that colonization and imperialism did to all of the cultures and countries that got colonized. What we see in Oppenheimer is something that theoretically might have been done historically. We should all know by now that that is not appropriate behavior. That sort of thing is a relic of history that I hope we have all come past because it's not really appropriate. If you are interested in this area of history, Oppenheimer's interest in the Bhagavad Gita, I want you to take a look at one of his students, David Bohm, B-O-H-M. David Bohm was a PhD student under Oppenheimer who was working on the same sort of technology that was used in making the nuclear bombs. But David Bohm could not get security clearance because of his involvement with communism. The US government took his PhD research and classified it so that David Bohm himself, the author of this research, could not even access his own work. He could not defend his PhD thesis. He could not go to work with Oppenheimer, and Oppenheimer just had to graduate him. David Bohm went on to be a fascinating figure. He was friends with Krishnamurti, and you can find a beautiful documentary about the life of David Bohm. You can also find video and audio recordings of him, different talks that he gives on quantum physics and spirituality and creativity, things like that. He's written multiple books that are available to the general public. He worked with Oppenheimer, had all the same kind of interests in Eastern philosophy and spirituality, but he did not go to work on the bomb. He was not a part of that crime against humanity. And I find his work and his life really, really fascinating. I found his writings to be very fascinating, especially on the topic of creativity. You can get your own free PDF ebook copy of the Bhagavad Gita through the link in the Show More section and the comments section. Go ahead, give it a download and see for yourself. What is in this book? What does it mean? How do we relate to it today as, people in this time and this era dealing with the things that we have to deal with? How can we relate to the Bhagavad Gita in an appropriate way? What can we learn from it? How can it support our spirituality? All of the books on the Bhagavad Gita available at that link are excellent. I have read them, highly recommend. So thank you, Nityanandam.